Jamieson, Greer have all been in touch with their counterparts in countries around the world to let them know the United States will still be at the negotiating table, and we still expect countries around the world to treat us fairly. Again, I will just close by saying that how ridiculous it is that we've been ripped off. Our middle class has been hollowed out. Our manufacturing base has left and gone overseas. Jobs have been offshored. And now no court did anything about that. No court did anything about hundreds of thousands of people being put out of work, about thousands of factories being closed down, about our deficits going to dangerous levels, as the New York Times has said. But now a court is trying to stop a president from trying to correct those wrongs of the past. And this administration will continue to do that. It's a promise the president made to the American people, and it's a promise they elected him on. We will win this battle in court, and the president will implement his America First trade policies.
U.S. President Donald Trump and Chinese President Xi Jinping agreed to reduce reciprocal tariffs earlier this month. U.S. President Donald Trump has accused China of violating a 2-week-old truce on tariffs, a claim China has responded to with its own accusations of U.S. wrongdoing. Washington and Beijing agreed to temporarily lower tit-for-tat tariffs after talks in Geneva earlier this month, but Trump said on Friday that China had totally violated its agreement with us. He did not give details, but U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson, Greer later said, China had not been removing non-tariff barriers as agreed under the deal. Beijing's response on Friday did not address the U.S. claims directly but urged the U.S. to cease discriminatory restrictions against China. The strong statements from both sides have raised concerns that trade tensions could again escalate between the world's two largest economies. Despite recent negotiations, Trump on Friday said in a Truth Social post that the tariffs his administration had imposed had been devastating for China, and so he had made a fast deal to save them from what I thought was going to be a very bad situation. Everybody was happy. That is the good news. The bad news is that China, perhaps not surprisingly to some, has totally violated its agreement with US. So much for being Mr. Nice Guy. He did not expand on his accusation, but Ambassador Greer later told TV network CNBC that China was yet to properly roll back other trade restrictions it had levied on the US. Greer said when China responded to the US's tariffs with its own, they also put in place countermeasures such as putting some US companies on blacklists and restricting exports of rare earth magnets, a critical component in cars, aircraft, and semiconductors. They removed the tariff like we did, but some of the countermeasures they've slowed on, Ambassador Greer said. He added the US had been closely watching China to make sure it would comply with the deal, and they were very concerned with the progress. The United States did exactly what it was supposed to do, and the Chinese are slow-rolling their compliance, which is completely unacceptable and has to be addressed. Greer said. China responded on Friday urging the US to immediately correct its erroneous actions, cease discriminatory restrictions against China, and jointly uphold the consensus reached at the high-level talks in Geneva. A spokesman from its Washington embassy said China had recently repeatedly raised concerns with the U.S. over its abuse of export control measures in the semiconductor sector. The U.S. already has restrictions in place on technology exports to China, and on Wednesday paused more sales to China of chip technologies crucial to semiconductors, and also paused exports of chemicals and machinery. Peng Yuliu said both sides had maintained communication since the talks in Geneva on the 11th of May, which had ended on a positive note. However, on Thursday, U.S. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent had said trade talks with China had become a bit stalled. Bessent told Fox News on Thursday, I think that given the magnitude of the talks, given the complexity, that this is going to require leaders of both the countries to weigh in with each other. Trump's global tariff regime was dealt a blow on Wednesday, following a ruling that he had exceeded his authority. His plans have been temporarily reinstated after the White House appealed the decision. His administration this week also moved to aggressively revoke the visas of Chinese students studying in the U.S., of which there are an estimated 280,000. In Geneva, Washington and Beijing had agreed to reduce tariffs imposed on each other's imports in a deal where both nations canceled some tariffs altogether and suspended others for 90 days. Bessent said talks on a further deal had lost momentum, but stressed they were continuing. I believe that we will be having more talks with China. in the next few weeks, and I believe we may at some point have a call between the president and Chinese President Xi Jinping, Bessent said on Thursday. He added the pair had a very good relationship, and he was confident that the Chinese will come to the table when President Trump makes his preferences known. Under the deal struck earlier this month, the U.S. lowered tariffs imposed on goods from China from 145% to 30%. China's retaliatory tariffs on U.S. goods dropped from 125% to 10%. The U.S. president has argued imposing tariffs on foreign goods would encourage U.S. consumers to buy more American-made goods, bringing back manufacturing jobs while increasing the amount of tax revenue raised. They have been used by the Trump administration as leverage in negotiations, as it seeks to reduce trade deficits with other nations. A delegation from Japan are continuing trade talks with their U.S. counterparts in Washington on Friday. Bessent said a couple of U.S. trade deals were very close, but a couple of them are more complicated. Trump's tariff regime remains in the balance, following the decision by the U.S. Court of International Trade, which ruled that Trump had overstepped his power by imposing the duties. Some analysts believe it will mean countries will be less likely to rush to secure trade deals with the U.S. A federal appeals court has granted a bid from the White House to temporarily suspend the lower court's order, which Trump described as horrific. Hopefully, the Supreme Court will reverse this horrible, country-sick threatening decision quickly and decisively, he wrote on his Truth Social platform.